Hi everyone, I'm Amit Katwala. I'm a writer and editor at Wired magazine. Thank you to Steffi and to DLD for having us. We've got a great panel for you on designing circularity. So I'm just going to get my panelists to say a few words to introduce themselves, but we've got Joe Iles from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Jessie Storey from Steelcase, and Daniela Bohlinger from BMW. Maybe you can start, Joe, by just saying a couple of sentences about you and your role.
Yeah, so I'm Joe Iles. I lead the circular design program at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We're a non-profit that works to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. And specifically on design, this program aims to equip and empower the world's designers. And we think there are a lot of designers, not just people who self-identify as designers, but people who influence design decisions. So we want to really empower them to design for a circular economy.
Thanks, Jessie.
Hi, I'm Jessie. I lead design for Steelcase for the EMEA region, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Steelcase, you might see some stuff around here, but it's a company that's been around for 111 years or so, so figuring out how to reinvent itself as work has progressed, because our main thing is being a manufacturer of furniture for office spaces. So the definition of what work is obviously not the same thing as it was in 1912. And that continues more than ever today. So I help lead, translate strategy and different things into what are the products that we make, and more importantly now, how do we make them? So,
thank you. Daniela.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Daniela, and I work for the BMW Group. Nearly the same age of our companies. I am able to be part of that since the last 22 years. And I used to work at the design department, and also I was convinced to change something within the design process to embed sustainability, and also now to embed it in innovation and strategy.
Thanks all. So this topic of this panel is designing circularity. So my first question, which I'll go to you with, Joe, first, is what role do designers have to play in building a circular economy?
Well, I think it's impossible to get away from the idea that designers have helped build today's economy, the linear economy. And if you think about something as simple as cutlery, a spoon for takeaway food, designers influenced what that looks like, the ergonomics, how it fits in your hand, whether they stack, whether they are pink or blue or green, the weight of that item, so all the physical properties, but also where the materials that they're made of, where they come from, where they might end up, how they're packaged, and really, as far as the need for takeout cutlery in the first place. So designers, and that's why we think they're more than just people who maybe are trained as designers, because there's a lot of stuff, right? So there must be a huge number of people who influence how we make and use that stuff. So we think there are really millions of these people. And the decisions they make, once they're made, can be really hard to reverse. So you might think about something like ocean plastic. Obviously, there are very well-intentioned efforts to pull plastic out of the ocean now, but I would argue it's easier to imagine systems for packaging or clothing which never leak plastic to the ocean. So that's why we talk about the designers being hugely influential and going back upstream to create products and systems in which they fit that are by design circular.
Thanks. Jessie, what does that look like in practice? How do you want to build on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to, well, I guess to be romantic about it, right? Design is ultimately professionalized creativity. So I think we've seen even the role of design kind of transform and change over the last 50 years, especially the industrial design role, as industry has changed. So in a way, we're looking more and more at sort of candidates and sort of roles and responsibilities that are almost post-industrial design. Or to reference some great work from before, what Industry 5.0 designers might be or look like. And I would say that the superpower of design is to take all these great ideas that are very complex, hard to break down, hard to digest, and often very abstract, and to make something tangible out of it. So even if it's like a fiction, or if it's something that's provocative, or something just as a starting point, you have something to react to and say like, there's another way to do this. There's another way to imagine how we work together earlier in the development process to envision things in a completely different way. So So turning the sort of linear process that we keep talking about, even in the design cycle, on its head a little bit and saying, how could that even be circular from the beginning?
Daniela, did you
Yeah, I
want to add something?
totally agree on that. And I think the beauty of what design is, or it's a kind of, we can visualize imaginations. And we were talking before about different design approaches, design thinking, or even further speculative design approaches where you envision a kind of future, and then you're gonna do a reverse thinking and start designing on with new requirements, and the requirements we need now for going into this kind of future.
So, Daniela, back to you. What are some of the key principles that we should be trying to achieve when we're designing something for circularity? What are the priorities that might be different from the priorities that we're designing for currently, say at BMW or another manufacturer?
Well, there are a lot, and they're not all written down, I think, at the moment. Mm-hmm. That's what we heard also in the panel before. I think there are certain principles of simply reduce. I mean, whatever is not designed has no carbon footprint, so the lessness is something which is beautiful technique. But also, we have new requirements on the new materials. We struggle a lot with recycled materials. We struggle a lot with natural materials coming from nature. And we have a talk with somebody really beautiful here, designing with hemp new materials. But these are all challenges, especially when you're working for the industry as a car industry. The requirements are so high that even so we try a lot, and we offer also internally a lot of innovations, they fail because they don't fit the requirements in the end.
Yeah, Jessie, I'm interested in your take, because you're obviously working on a very different type of product, but does that same thing apply?
Well, I think we all have different versions of frameworks that we have as a starting point, right? So, I mean, I think as far as like carbon footprint, material responsibility, however you want to measure that, define that, and that's arguable, I think, to some extent too. And designing for disassembly or secondary surfaces, third surfaces, and things like that. So I think there's different versions of that framework, but the other part of that is saying, if those are criteria as the system exists today, where's the critical thinking and sort of where you can maybe have the bravery or the challenge to say, you know what, this is still the status quo, there's certain things here that are still not right. How do you elevate those and propose new opportunities within building the right community and ecosystem to accomplish it?
Sure. Joe?
Yeah, well, I'd just add that we use the principles of a circular economy, of eliminate waste and pollution, circulate products and materials at their highest value, and regenerate natural systems as some overarching principles. I do notice that when I'm speaking to designers, they kind of go, that's still quite vague and top level. But that's sort of deliberate, because really what we want people to understand or consider is the systemic implications of what they're creating. Yeah. Because you don't want to repair a sandwich. The design principles that you take on board for a food product are going to be very different for a mobile phone or a building or an energy system or a supermarket. So really it's about, first and foremost, having as deep as possible understanding of the circular economy and those essential principles, and then really trying to grapple with the system around your product or the material you're using, or your organization or your industry. And that, we think, will help inform the specific strategies that you want to implement on whatever you're creating.
Definitely. I'm struck by Jessie's description of design as professionalized creativity, because that kind of implies it's this boundless space where you can go anywhere, but actually design has always been constrained by different things, and perhaps the need to build circularity and is just another constraint that requires more elegant solutions or simpler solutions. So my question for all of you is, how do you narrow that use of materials, or narrow things down so they can be more circular without narrowing your ambition for the product? You know, how do you do that? How do you balance that desire for circularity with, you know, the need to be, you know, the best market leader, or the need to achieve certain other goals that the company might have?
Well, I'd start. Walter Stahel, who's one of the sort of forefathers of the circular economy, if you can call him that. I think he was quoting another industrialist where he said, "Survival is not mandatory." This is to me, this is not about just applying the circular economy to meet a few KPIs around waste reduction or something like that, or to look good on a CSR report. I think really it's about future strategy, about competitiveness, about investing in a business model or an offering that's going to enable your organization to be continually relevant, and in some cases, actually, to maintain the license to operate. Because there are some practices, I'm sure we can all think of some, around that are fundamentally linear and wasteful, that are, year by year, people are saying this is not acceptable. And I think that those organizations, it's going to become more and more pressing for them to maybe park some of the other stuff and say this is actually fundamental that we redesign some of these. And others, it might be about saying, let's get ahead of the competition and offer something that's really different, especially in markets where they're becoming quite sort of saturated, and there's I guess a bit of a diminishing returns on the ownership of stuff. Like certainly in the West, I think a lot of people have a lot of stuff that is not giving them real happiness or well-being.
Jessie? Oh, sorry,
yeah,
Daniela.
I mean, maybe just a little anecdote to add on to that, I guess, is the sort of beautiful thing to say is, the answer doesn't change if you don't change the question, I think. And this has come up a lot of times, is like, how do you measure financial viability, and how do you measure long-term success versus short-term success? And so if capitalistically we're sort of pressured to always think short-term, you're not building the picture of what you're losing if you're not investing in the long term. And I think that's always been the story of innovation, is that it takes the seeds to plant small bets and let them grow over time, but at the time that you're also still holding on to your financial business model that's currently working. So it's not about doing a monoculture, right? It's about kind of figuring out a polyculture that you can build within your company, I think.
Yeah, and I think as well, if you want to embed circular economy, it is not only about the technical dismantling project, it is understanding the holistic connection between everything. Circular economy is something where you can apply it to total new business models, just thinking not linear anymore. And it's not only done just designing whatever you can dismantle out of the car. This is important, but we were just discussing it. It is the economical, the E from the ESG, that's what it is. The economical part of it. Yeah, we want to get our materials back. We had this talk before about raw earth. We are going into a lack of materials. So if we want to stay relevant in the future, we need to collaborate. We need to understand how we together get access to high quality materials. So we need the industry as well, even more than the designers who start designing the parts which can be dismantled, the architects of whatever, in our case is the car. But also the engineers, the people who are thinking deeply in chemistry, and understanding how we can avoid certain materials where we know they're not good. And I think that is the beauty of innovation then. If you really start tackling the problems where they are, you get a better understanding, analyze it, and then see how you can actually push this towards the goals we have within our society and substitute. So get the brain into these kind of solution findings. And then you have these beautiful moments of eureka's, of like, wow, we found something which can substitute this. We don't need it anymore. And we are on the positive, we have positive impact. I think that would be the glorious idea of how we do it.
We were talking on Monday about the tension between luxury and circularity, and you were saying that you didn't think it was a contradiction. It'd be great if you could kind of talk about that a little bit.
Because, I mean, there is this discussion that sustainability can be a sacrifice or luxury cannot be sustainable. And I'm absolutely convinced it is sustainable. The new luxury is embedded sustainable, and it's just the matter of redesigning luxury, getting the old out and embracing the new design, the new look. And I like to refer to Bauhaus. Bauhaus is still highly aesthetic design, and if I look at the products, they are super simple designed, 3 materials, and you can easily unscrew it. And I think the beauty of this kind of luxury is something we have to look at when we're starting designing new. And then you don't see any kind of reduction or performance, you're missing any kind of performance. And I think that is the part we should stop talking about sacrificing. We should start talking about chances we have and opportunities, this new ideas give us.
Just to add on that, I think in the linear economy, we're so educated that every economic act has a negative consequence for the environment or for people. And of course, in that mindset, you'd want to do less of it because someone or something is getting harmed when you go out and buy a loaf of bread or a chair or a car. The aspiration that I've held for the past 10 years or so in working on the circular economy is that if we can flip to a model that is regenerative, where that has positive impacts for the environment and for people, then you would celebrate doing those things. You would do more of them. And when people sort of say that, they sort of bristle, and I understand that because we're so far away from that right now. And again, we're so educated that we shouldn't be saying do more because we've been told to do less. But I think that's what we should aspire to, because that's how nature works, right? You don't see a cherry tree saying, I'm going to make a few less cherries next year because so many got wasted this time. There's abundance, but it works.
That's fascinating.
And maybe to add to that too, I would say I'm optimistic about the changing sensibilities of consumers as well. I mean, I think there's a growing movement, a growing concern, more and more passion on the topic in general of what people are actually demanding from products. So, the same thing happened with safety in a number of industries several generations ago, and now we have requirements for safety, right? So it could be that becomes less of a, oh, isn't this an ambitious thing to do? Aren't we great people for doing it? To, no, this is a mandatory thing, and this is something that's a requirement for the good of the planet and for people.
But until it becomes mandatory, it's going to have to come from companies themselves. So maybe, Jessie, you can start with this. How do you win that battle internally as a designer if the circular product that you've designed maybe doesn't fit with other needs of the company? How do you have that conversation internally, and how do you make sure that it's your design that wins in the end?
Well, I think it depends on where a project starts and where a project is born, and basically what are the stakeholders that you bring along at the beginning of a project. So instead of kind of trying to use the regular pipeline and then forcing through criteria at the beginning of the pipeline to make sure that you have the stakeholders aligned to say, these are the trade-offs that we're going to make, but this is why there's long-term value that we're creating with this. And more, it's not just what product comes out of the end of the pipeline, but it's about the ecosystem that you're building more and more ahead of time, the partnerships that you're building to be able to do things in different ways beyond the capability of your own company.
Daniela, did you have anything to add on that one?
Well, you were just mentioning it, also the collaborations we need. And I think extremely important is that you have certain guidelines and you show, just for the example of 2 years ago when we launched our BMW iVision Circular, and I think I was really happy that we were able to show in a very interesting, appealing, elegant, sophisticated way how circularity can be interpreted even with a car, because that's the enemy. But showing that this is something which is highly adorable in a way. And this is also a showcase. For me, it was more internally that we can start talking about the principles of circularity, the principles of sustainable design. Even so, it was, of course, not all of that was can be proven of going into a kind of serious mass production. But we have something we can show. And you have to give examples also to the design team. They're coming from most of the designers who are from the old school. You have to train them. The good thing is there are new people coming fresh from universities. So we are influencing now there as teachers or professors on the universities, teach them the principles. So they now start embedding that as a given and teaching probably the surroundings. And I think with that, you can ramp up these topics more and more, and everybody within the company has to be a role model for that, and walk the talk. And then you can even, you see that it's spreading. And I think that's the beauty. And there's one thing we also discussed is that we never talk about failures. And especially when you start this kind of new transformation, it's a transformation of a whole company, you have to be able to talk about failure, and don't even call it failure. Call it What did you say?
Well, I call it circular-ish.
Yeah.
Loads of the innovation that's happening now is certainly not completely circular. It might even be only incrementally better than the linear model, but someone has tried. They've made an effort, and it wouldn't be fair, or it wouldn't be fair to just say that they completely failed, or that they are stuck in the linear economy, because I think we need to nurture those innovations rather than sort of quashing them. Yeah.
But then we have, of course, also to navigate that, to get a better understanding what is really important for the company, what is paying in the company's goal, and then you can actually go and select a little bit better and probably shape also this kind of innovations you really need to tackle the climate change issue, race to X, to really focus on these topics and then give them KPIs, make them measurable, and then to have a better understanding of where you really push your innovations to.
Jessie?
Yeah, I mean, I love this. So I'm getting all like, I mean, one of the things that I think we're doing, and maybe an evolution that we're making, is that there's no longer necessarily a sustainability team that's the police officer, right? It's not at the end of the product development cycle where it's like, that doesn't pass the test. But at that point, it's way too late. Instead, it's really about but not only embedding the practice, but the sense of responsibility, but like you're saying about education, getting everybody to kind of co-own the understanding of what has impact, how it's measured, so that even early in the conceptualization phase, people can start making an understanding of the trade-offs that, hey, if you started imagining that product with carbon fiber, it's going to have this, but if you start thinking of it with this material instead, so already those important dialogues happen at a much earlier phase in the development process as well.
Yeah.
Got a couple of minutes left. I wanted to ask you guys, well, so much more, but since we've only got a couple of minutes left, I wanted to ask you for your favorite examples of designing for circularity, and then also what the future should look like and how we get there. I appreciate that's two very different questions bolted into one, but we're going to go with it. Joe, you were talking about genes earlier.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably one of my favorite current examples, and there was some good discussion earlier about there's no one definition or how do we get alignment around certain design approaches for a circular economy. And something we're really proud of is a project called the Genes Redesign, where we took initially about 50 textile mills, fashion houses, high street retailers, recyclers, and locked them in a room together for 2 days and said, come up with a baseline for genes that are designed for a circular economy. And so they wrote the Genes Redesign guidelines, and now that cohort has gone up to, I think, over 100 organizations, and this year, I believe about 1.5 million pairs of jeans were designed according to the Genes Redesign guidelines. So in quite a short space of time, a chunk of the denim industry has convened around an agreed set of guidelines that will then create product that should make the future recycling industry for denim more viable. So that, I think, shows promise that could be applied to a bunch of other different products, not just in fashion, but beyond. And I think what I'm hoping for next is really for designers to be more utilized. So speculative design, facilitating conversations, building capability within organizations, responding or setting rules or guidelines within industry, using and experimenting with new tools. These are all super important ways in which designers are massively underappreciated. And we've tried to sum that up in a report earlier this year called From Ambition to Action, which identified those 6 levers where designers can play a bigger role.
Right. Daniela?
I was thinking about that, and it's hard for me to find a product or like just something which I would name. It's a good example for it. But what I would like to, again, point out is that circular economy can work if we embed also new technologies and industries towards that. And I think we are not there yet. Every product you buy and you give back in a circle is a product probably too much you bought. On your side, like on the fashion industry, I'm struggling with that a lot. I think when we come into this kind of holistic systems, for example, also with cars, that there is a give back system where I can bring it, there will be carefully selected, the cars will be dismantled. This is a long story because the cars are a very long time on the road, and we are waiting for the first electric cars coming back. But if this plus artificial intelligence, plus any kind of new manufacturing methods comes together, then this becomes really beautiful.
Jessie, last word to you.
Okay. Well, I guess I would just take the opportunity, like as a small, what you call circular-ish thing that Steelcase has done. You may have noticed this installation in the atrium here that was these scrap fabrics and things like that. This was a partnership with Gabrielle, which is a textile manufacturer, and they've developed this textile that we use in upholstery based on scraps that are basically left on our factory floors. So I think within the last year in our Saarburg factory in France, I think we've reclaimed more than 17 tons of scrap fabric that we give to Gabrielle, and they make this fabric that we now repurpose and reuse in our products again. So, I mean, that's circular-ish, but it's getting there, and it also includes communities that are now engaged in this as well. So I think the one thing I just want to make sure I get in the hat there, too, is the people aspect of this, the communities that are at the scale of local, contributing to the bigger picture of how everything works together as well.
Brilliant. Well, we're definitely out of time, so thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for watching. Hope that you found that useful.
Thank you.
Thank you to all getting played off. Thank you to Joe. Thank you to Daniela. Thank you to Jessie. Cheers.